Pozdravljeni vsi, moje ime je Tamara Čudović in bom danes predstavila v bistvu svojega kolego iz podjetja Darka Kukovca, ki bo nocoj z vami podelil izkušnje developmenta za platforme in na mobilu in desktopu, torej za hibridne aplikacije, in vam bo v bistvu razložil, katere reperji so odločili se v podjetju, da bojo uporabljali, kako se te iste aplikacije lažje vzdržujejo, torej bo delil veliko izkušnje svoje sabo. Tukaj je tudi podpora iz podjetja še, ki ga bojo nasmejali skozi, da za Darko se že opravičujem, če bo kdaj padel v smeh. Drugače Infinum je podjetje, ki je na Hrvaškem in tudi v Sloveniji pa Ameriki. Smo v bistvu delamo software za razne platforme in tehnologije, rešujemo kakšnekoli probleme dejansko imajo ljudje, imamo mi in drugi, od samega razvoja ideje do popolne izvedbe projekta in objave, ki se projekta objavlja. Torej, ne bom več zažila, uživamo v prezentaciji kolege Darka Kukovca.
Hello everyone. So as Tamara said, I'm Darko. I'm a JavaScript developer at Infinum, and I work in the Zagreb office, so it's better if I talk in English. So I'll talk today about multi-platform hybrid development and how we made applications that run both on desktop and on mobile. So probably most of you know about hybrid apps. So these are apps that are made in web technologies like HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and they are packaged in a native wrapper. So a native app that has a web view in which the application runs. So here's an example of an application that I encountered last year. It was in Zagreb airport, and this looks like something like application in Internet Explorer wrapper, which is probably very fun to develop with. So why make hybrid desktop apps? Well, the first reason is you don't want to do it multiple times. So if you have to support, I don't know, Windows, OS X, iOS, and Android, you would need to do it 4 times. Yeah, sure, you could share some parts of the code, but you would need to do the UI and other things multiple times. And the second part is you probably already know JavaScript. So JavaScript, HTML, and CSS are pretty easy to learn, a little bit difficult to master, but pretty much everyone can start with it. And if the apps are done right, they can be cheaper to develop. And the other reason why you should do hybrid desktop apps is because Atwood's law, so any application that can be written in JavaScript will eventually be written in JavaScript. So our experience at Infinum, we do a lot of mobile hybrid apps, but who doesn't? But we do some pretty special applications, like I said, that work both on desktop and mobile. And they are pretty complicated, so pretty complex. So 2 of them work. So all 3 applications are for cruise industry, and 2 of them work on cruise ships. So this is the first one. It's a kiosk-style app. It works on 14-inch touchscreen, so guests come, log in, and then tap on the TVs that are on walls. This application works on Windows, and because we use Macs for development, it also works on OS X without any additional work. The second app is a desktop hybrid app, and it's actually the users get the setup file and they install it on their computers. It works on Windows and OS X. It requires some additional features like optical drive access, cryptography, and it's auto-updatable. And this application was actually a rewrite of an application that was like 3 or 4 years old, and it was made in Adobe Air and CoffeeScript. The third application is actually most interesting, it's a multi-platform hybrid app, so it's also a kiosk app. It works on Windows, iPads, Android tablets, and of course on OS X because we are using it during the development. The second interesting thing about this application is that it uses 3 different APIs, and the APIs don't support the same features, and even the features inside of one API can be turned off and on. So the application has to be very modular. So parts of the app can be turned on or off, or read-only, or so it had to be very modular. And there are some additional features like communication with card readers, so the guest can come and log in with his card. And this application was actually also a rewrite of an old app that was used only on iPads, and it was made in Sencha Touch, which was really fun. And this is the screenshot of this app. So this is only the main screen. There are much more than. So what I'll be talking about today, I will talk about 3 things. So what wrapper choices there are, which wrappers did we choose. I will talk about how we made the applications, how to make a complex application that's easy to maintain and add features to. And the third thing I will talk about is how to automate as much as possible. So you don't want to repeat the same tasks every day, multiple times per day. So the first thing I will talk about is the wrappers. So the wrappers are pretty interesting because they give you the ability to work with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But if you need additional features, you'll need something else, something additional. And most of the wrappers, they give you the features, but in their own way. So when you choose a wrapper, you probably don't want to rewrite the application afterwards if you regret the decision. So choose wisely. So when we researched these wrappers, when we started working on the applications, there were a few options like Adobe Air, and we used it previously. And then there's Qt, Chrome apps, and App.js. They are pretty good, but our choice was actually Node WebKit. So Node WebKit is a wrapper that uses Chromium for displaying your UI and most of other stuff. But if you need some additional features like accessing the file system or something that's not usual to do in Chromium, in that case you use Node.js. And Node WebKit works on Windows, Linux, and OS X. So the good parts about Node WebKit is it's developed really fast. So they follow the Chromium and Node.js builds really fast, and you can always use the new features. Since it's using Node.js, there are a lot of Node.js modules, like hundreds of thousands of them, and you pretty much can find anything you need. Third good part is that if you need something additional that's not in Chromium, they didn't reinvent the wheel, because you can use Node.js and they work together. So you are already using something you know and you can use somewhere else. There are some UI specific APIs, but you probably don't need them that often. And the great thing about using Chromium and Node WebKit is that you have Chrome DevTools. So it's really easy to debug and develop the application. And since Chromium and Node.js in Node WebKit are merged together, you actually can debug the Node.js code also. So Node WebKit is distributed as an executional file, so and a few DLLs for Windows and a regular OS X app. That's great because you don't need to rely on some repositories like Chrome Web Store or something similar. When you need to update the app, you just replace the execution file, or you can even only replace the application package that's kind of a zip of your application, and the execution file stays unchanged. Of course, there are some not so great parts. Some Node WebKit builds can be unstable, but that's not generally an issue because during your development you will try a bunch of the builds and you'll figure out which are stable and you'll probably stick with them. There's one, I would say, feature that we learned about the hard way. If you refresh the page, since you have Chromium, it will actually stay in memory. So we had a pretty nasty memory leak, and it was really hard to debug. But using the Node WebKit UI, you can actually make a full refresh that would clean this. And the third negative part is that there's no built-in auto-update. So there's neither an update so the Node WebKit would update itself, but there's also not, it doesn't exist a mechanism that would update your part, so your custom part of the app. And that was one of our requirements, so we had to implement it ourselves. Next to Node WebKit, I would like to mention Atom Shell, which is also a good wrapper. We didn't choose it. The main reason why we didn't choose it because it didn't exist when we started developing the apps, but it's really a good choice, and depending on the type of the app you are making, both of them are really great choices. The second part is mobile wrappers. So there's pretty much the Cordova, that's the general wrapper, and there are a dozen of other special wrappers for gaming or something like this. Or if none of them is good enough for you, you can always make a custom wrapper. And that was our choice because of some specific requirements. So our HTML, JavaScript, and CSS is not packaged in the app on the tablets. Instead, it's loaded from the server. And the second requirement for us was communication with different card readers, so swipe card readers, RFID readers, and different makers of the readers. So there was a lot of custom code here. So the good parts about custom wrappers are it's easily customizable because you're building it from the ground up and you add features you need. The second good part is you have the complete control. So if a feature is missing, you add it, and if there's some bug, you know probably how to fix it. You don't need to rely on someone else to fix it. But there are some negative parts, like it has less features. So if you make a custom wrapper, the one thing you will have is a browser. And if you decide to package your HTML into the app, you actually can't communicate with a server outside. You have to implement this yourself. If you're using one of the other wrappers like PhoneGap or Cordova, that's already handled, so you don't need to think about it. And if you're building a custom wrapper, you need more time, you need native app developers. So our recommendation would be to use Cordova, because it just works most of the time. It's beta tested, so there are a lot of phones, a lot of versions of operating systems, and you don't want to think about some bugs that happen only on Samsung phones or on, I don't know, some Huawei phones, Sony. So Cordova pretty much has this handled. And if you need some additional features, they have a lot of plugins. So if you need access to file system, they have the plugin. If you need the native Google Analytics, they have a plugin, and etc. Another great thing is you don't need native developers most of the time. So unless you need some custom plugin, you don't need native developers, so they can do other things. One also important part is you shouldn't probably reinvent the wheel, because people that make Cordova thought about this a lot and they probably know better. So another thing I would like to mention here regarding the wrappers. So I mentioned we needed auto-updating. So this was pretty tricky part. So for the kiosk apps, we actually run a small server inside the wrapper, and the API just calls our server, so a small API call, and tells us, well, there's an update and here's where you can download it. At that point, the application that will download its application package, replace it, and restart itself. On the tablets, it's much easier because, as I said, our application code is hosted on the server, so all we need is to replace the server code and refresh the apps. The most complicated part was to update the applications that users install by themselves, because, well, we don't have access to them from the outside. So for OS 6, it was kind of easy, because in OS 6, apps are just folders with some files in them. And the good thing is that the files aren't locked while the application is running. So we were able to download the update, just replace all the files and restart the app. But on Windows it was much more complicated. Because on Windows the exit file and some DLLs are locked, so you can't modify or replace them while the application is running. Our first idea was to, for the application to start a script that would wait for the application to shut down. Then the script would replace all the files and start the application again. But, well, this was buggy, because it should work on multiple Windows versions. And we did, and there are antivirus software that would probably flag this as something that shouldn't be done. So we went with a much simpler idea. So when an update is available, we actually only download the setup file, and we ask the user to go through a few steps of the installer, so a few clicks on next, and that's it. This requires some user interaction, but it's much more reliable. So, and the second part I would like to talk about is how to make applications that are easily maintainable and you can add features more easily. So in all three of our applications we are using Backbone.js, Require.js, SCSS, and Handlebars templating. And as development tools we are using Yeoman Generator and Bower repository. So if you're maintaining the apps, and we are, you want to make sure the code quality stays high. And for this we are using JSHint and SSS linter. And because developers are lazy and you don't want to rely on them to run the tools, we actually automated this. So if you are committing your code to Git, it will trigger both of them, and if one of them fails, you can't make the commit, so you have to fix the problem. Also, when we are building the apps, the same is done. So if one of them fails, you can't make the build. And during the development, they are also watching for file changes, and they will warn you if something is wrong and you should fix it. And the fourth part is not that important for code quality, but for development speed. So you probably want to run JSynth inside of your code editor because, well, people aren't perfect. So you'll probably somewhere forget semicolon or parenthesis, and you don't want to save the file, switch to the browser, refresh, and then see something blow up. If you're using JSynth inside of the code editor, it will mark this for you, and you will fix it more. You will fix it much faster. Another part that ensures code quality is the code reviews. Unfortunately, most of us don't have time or maybe even experience to do the manual code reviews, although they are much better. So you can use some automated code reviews like Code Climate and Codesy, which are hosted and you have to pay for them. Or you can use Plato, which is a command line tool which you run and then it generates a report for you. So these are actually screenshots from Codesy for one of those projects. And it gives you a grade for your code. Another important part is source code versioning. So if you are developing apps, I hope you're using some kind of code versioning. So something like CVN, SVN, Git, Team Foundation Server, or whatever. So in Infinum we are using Git, and more specifically for those projects we are using Git Flow, and these are additional rules that you can use with Git, but you aren't forced to. That also ensure to make the code quality better and to decrease the chances of some bugs. So in Git Flow there's master branch like in any other repository, and this branch in Git Flow should always be production ready. So if someone comes to you and says, yeah, I want the newest version of the app, you should be able to switch to master branch and build the app. Then there's develop branch that has your newest features, but those features aren't necessarily stable and they probably have bugs. And when you're making new features, you make new feature branches. So this way, if more developers are working on the same repository, they can work on their own features without interrupting one another. And there are some additional branches like release and hotfix. This looks like something like this. So you have a master branch, develop branch that are continuously there, and you make feature branches from develop, and you return them to develop, and once you are ready to ship the app, you just merge the develop with master, and you can build from master then. The third part I would like to talk about is automations. Eddie Osmani from Google said automation isn't about being lazy, it's about being efficient. So if you're doing a task that takes like 5 minutes a day, and you are doing it for a year, you would save more than a day if you automate it. So why use test runners? Because they improve quality, you can ship your product faster, and it's easily repeatable. So if you make a small mistake like forgetting to change your app version, you can just change it, run the task again, and it's done fast. So test runners aren't something new. So there are some well-known like Make and Maven, and there are some great JavaScript test runners like Grunt and Gulp. So Grunt is a JavaScript task runner that has a lot of plugins, so you can do pretty much anything with them. And it's pretty mature, so it's more than 2 years old. The second popular task runner is Gulp. It has a little less plugins, like 800 of them, and it's younger. It's like about 1 year old. The main difference between Grunt and Gulp is that Grunt is configuration based, so you write a lot of configuration, while on Gulp you write code. So I want you to do this, 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 and this. And the other major difference is that the way Grunt works, it makes much more I/O operations. So that's probably not a good idea. So our choice was Grunt because, well, Gulp didn't exist yet. So the plus for Grunt is that it has a big community and a lot of plugins, but Gulp is easier to use, and its community is growing really fast. And when you are choosing a task runner for JavaScript, there's not really a wrong choice between those two. If you are starting with, if you don't have experience with Grunt, I would recommend to use Gulp. But if you already know how Grunt works, then it's a good choice also. So a few examples that we use task runners for. One of them is the develop task. This task runs most of the time. So when you start working on this project, you start the task, and when you're done, you stop it. So this task will start with the HTTP server, which hosts your files, and it will watch for your files, and when you change something like CSS or JavaScript, it will automatically reload your app inside of the browser. So it saves you a few seconds there, and it will do some stuff in the background, so it will run your linters, hinters, and compilers in the background. Another task is the task that runs when we commit the code, and we use Husky Grunt plugin for that because it hooks to the it sets hooks for Git and does this automatically. So it also runs lint, hint, and can run some automated code reviews and etc. The third major task we are using is the build task. So the build task usually does something like linting, compiling your SCSS to CSS, and you probably have multiple files. For instance, one of those 3 projects has around 150 JavaScript files. So you want to concatenate them to one file, minify them, so it's smaller and probably faster to execute. And another task we are running is revision task. So we don't want to audit our app and then figure out that the previous version was cached. So we actually calculate hashes from the files and put these hashes into the file name. So once you run the application, it will grab the new files. Of course, we had some additional requirements. So for our kiosk apps, we actually make a package, a zip package of our app that we can send, and we don't need to do it manually. And as I mentioned, we are able to audit our kiosk apps remotely. So we are using this here also. So we have a test device, and during the build execution, it will actually contact the test device and update it automatically. And when the build is done, it will notify us so we can continue to work. And for the desktop apps, we actually make the native apps. So we have a OS 6 app and Windows. So we make the OS 6 app, we sign it, so it doesn't. When the user runs it, it will see okay, this is from this developer and Apple trusts it and etc. And we make a DMG file, so this is for you who don't use OS X, this is a container, so something like zip or ISO. And for Windows, well, we can't actually build the app on OS X, but we prepare all the files we need on OS X, and at that point we only need to run one script on Windows that will build all the remaining things. And my point is, try to automate as much as you can, but be careful to not try to automate everything, even something that's not worth to automate. Thank you.
We have plenty of time for questions, so feel free. Any questions?
Yeah.
Questions in English or?
Yeah, we have. I think we have native speakers in the audience also.
Okay. So actually, what I was expecting is a bit more focus on mobile. So my question is, what is the difference? What is the threshold when you should go for hybrid or HTML app versus native? So what is your experience in that?
Well, if you need to make an application that should work on multiple operating systems like Android and iOS, it really depends what the application is. So if it's something similar, simple like a few buttons, it's probably faster to make it native because, well, yeah, because I mean the developers can put some few buttons, design it, and that's it. But for something more complicated, it's a tough choice because for hybrid apps, you can do it with less code and you do it only once, but there are some downsides like performance. So it really depends what you need.
I have one question.
Yeah.
So, are you aware of any hybrid apps that perhaps we are all using in this room, but we don't know that they're not written in native iOS and APIs?
I'm not sure about now, but for a long time Facebook was actually a hybrid app.
And a bad hybrid app.
A bad hybrid app, yeah.
Actually, there's some hub. There's if anyone is here using a matchmaking application, finding girls, singles, etc. Most of them are written in HTML, and you probably don't use it.
And there are some mobile banking apps also that are hybrid.
Like yours.
Yeah, one of ours. One.
Yeah, they don't want to give us money to make it better.
Yeah, that's the main reason.
And they are happy with the app.
Well,
The customers.
the customers, they're kind of happy because it's made in Essential Touch, which is
Yeah.
Essential Touch 1, which is quite
Yeah.
old and obsolete. And for the new phones, it actually breaks a lot. We have to do a lot of multi-patching to make it work on new phones. But they deem it acceptable to, well, it works. It actually works. It's kind of slow for most of some things, but the users are happy if the application works. Satisfying.
Actually, one of your apps is Hack.
Yeah, but Hack is native app.
Yeah, but it was not for some time. Or it crashed a lot, I don't know.
It was native app always.
Because on iOS it was already didn't work.
iOS. Yeah, no, Hack was always a native app.
Any questions left?
About testing
Mhm.
mobile device, because you have a wide range of
Mhm.
devices from the low end to the high end.
Yeah.
How do you test different?
Well, most of the time we actually have a few devices that we test. So we have one low end, one high end. We try to have one Samsung, one HTC, one Sony. So we cover most of the market. And for this project here, we actually were pretty lucky because we know it's always iPad with iOS 7 or 8, and it's always Android tablet with KitKat. So here it was much easier to work. And for other apps, yeah, you have to cover as much as possible of the market. And of course, there will always be some Chinese makers that do something weird, but yeah.
How is the experience in the low end devices?
Most of the time it depends on the operating system. So the newer Android versions are much faster with the same hardware than the old. So if you have a gingerbread device and it's all low-end device, it will be pretty bad. But if you have a KitKat device, mid-range, it will be pretty great.
Yeah, but that also depends on the kind of application. So if you have a lot of animations, a lot of transitions on lower end of devices, well, it's going to be, yeah, that's one of the main reasons that hybrid applications are popular, and it's because the UI is kind of laggy sometimes.
Yeah, but so Apple and Google are working on this, and there's some big improvements. Like now in Android 5 Lollipop, the web view is actually auto-upgradable. So at this point, it works with on Chromium 37, which is kind of the newest, and all the future. So when the new Chrome version comes, you won't need to wait for the whole OS update like you did before. Instead, it will just update in the background. So in the future, in a year or two, it will be much easier to work with web technologies.
So for now, do you need to do any tweaks across different Android systems?
Yeah, because well, the old yeah. So the older Android versions don't support all the features. So in some cases, you'll probably want to fall back to something different. And in the new versions, starting from I don't know KitKat, it has pretty much all the desktop features, and you can use all of them, and they are much faster than on the older ones. So yeah, if you want animations, you'll probably want them on the newer phones, and you'll turn them off on the I don't know gingerbread and ice cream sandwich.
Using the newest phone level Cordova, is there still any part of the system that you can reach, that you could reach with native?
Well,
Or you can get the phone, you can get the pictures, you can get everything there.
yeah, well, you have
Rendering support.
so the basic Cordova doesn't actually have anything, but you have plugins. So you have a file system plugin for everything. So even if there's not a plugin you need, and for something that's possible in a native app, you can make a plugin yourself. And at that point, you are using native APIs. So everything you can do in native apps, you can do it with plugins.
So no more questions left. Darko will soon be here. Chat. So let's wrap up. Thank you everybody. See you next year, because sadly our December presenter canceled the last minute.